Hello and welcome to the March 2020 Sunshine Summit. My name is Heather and I am your host. This week, in association with Geeks Rising, I am bringing to you a week of live streams to recognize and celebrate connections. The connections that we make have a huge impact on our journeys, and this event brings people together from around the world to recognize and celebrate existing connections, as well as an opportunity to create new ones. We are on day 4 of the March 2020 Sunshine Summit. It's a live stream event. We are live streaming at sunshinesummit.live, broadcasting with twitch.tv/sunpowerpod, and we would love for you to join us live. If you can't make it, that's okay. They are available as replays on YouTube as well as Twitch, and you can find all of that information at sunshinesummit.live. Today, I am honored and very excited to introduce our guest, Rich from Podcast World Tour. It is exciting what their mission is, and I can't wait to share that with you today. Welcome to the Sunshine Summit.
Yeah, they're very excited to be here, and much appreciation and gratitude. I know you've been working hard on this, and we've been communicating for a while, so the day has arrived. Very excited, and again, much gratitude and appreciation.
You're most welcome. I love what you're doing. And on the gratitude thing, it was amazing to see at International Podcast Day that you received the Gratitude Award for what you've been doing. And I think it was amazingly well-deserved and awesome that International Podcast Day recognized that as well.
Yeah, that's where we virtually met, right?
Yeah,
The first
it
time
is.
was at International Podcast Day. Shout out to Steve and Lee, and it's just amazing what they're doing. And I had tuned in over the years to that, just kind of hit and miss as a podcaster. And then the backstory to that is really reached out to them like literally a few days before their annual event, and just said if there's any way they could show or feature a 2-minute video about the cause and the mission, which we'll talk about in a minute, and how we're helping deaf kids hear and speak for life, which is just, I mean, it's nothing short of a miracle,
Yeah.
and yet it's not, because it's reality. So that'll be a lot of the conversation today. But on the International Podcast Day, when I had never met Steve or Lee, never connected on LinkedIn or never an email, never met them in person, virtually no contact other than just catching a few of their episodes. And then again, days before the event, I sent them the video. I said, if there's just any way, and this was on their contact form on their website. So it's about as generic as you can get, right? And I was just crossing my fingers and hoping for the best. But any opportunity we have to share this mission and rally the podcasting community behind it is what I feel like my life has led up to this moment. And so anyway, I shared that with them just days beforehand. I said, I know it's the 11th hour, you got a lot on your docket, but if there's any way you can just in some way share the video.
Yeah.
And Steve reached out to me literally within an hour or so and said, with your permission, we'd like to share the video. You're like, are you kidding me? With my permission? Absolutely, right? And they actually showed it, as you probably saw during the kickoff of that event. If you watch the replay of that, Steve literally it looks like it was dead air and silent, but he was so choked up, he had to turn it over to Dave to continue the conversation. And as you mentioned, I still get emotional, but we received literally the third only of the International Podcast Day Gratitude Award, and I'm tempted to run downstairs and go grab it real quick and show it to your listeners. But maybe we'll do that if we have a break. But we take it to all the trade shows and events we go to, and it's just amazing what's happened before and since.
That's incredible. Dave and Steve Lee are incredibly supportive of everyone in the podcast community. I absolutely love what they do. Very amazing event that International Podcast Day is, and I'm thrilled that they were able to feature your video as part of that celebration. And you have done amazing things already with International Podcast World Tour. Would you be able to tell us what it is and what your mission is?
Sure. Well, I'm a fellow podcaster, as most of your listeners and viewers are. And so I was in radio. I was in California for about 10 years prior to getting into podcasting, launched a podcast studio here in Atlanta, Georgia. And now I'm talking to my best friend in New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. But launching that and then had great, early on success. And I felt like we're onto something.
Mm-hmm.
This could be a big deal. And so literally months into it, I figured, how could we kind of give back? So it took a lot of search, believe it or not, to find the right alignment, I felt like, with the right nonprofit to give back. And it was actually, a couple of years later, maybe even further down the road, we identified this nonprofit that's been around about 40 years, but it's one of those best kept secrets. And so our mission is really an awareness campaign. So to be very transparent at this stage, we're not raising money for the nonprofit. We hope to down the road, but I use the analogy like Tom's Shoes, if you've heard of their give back, right? So their mission is for every pair of shoes they sell, they give a pair of shoes to a kid that doesn't have shoes. And Home Depot, based here in Atlanta, is aligns with Habitat for Humanity because they're in the building of the business of building houses. I tell when I'm at events, I tell fellow podcasters, I said, we're not in the business of selling shoes or houses, right? We're in the business of hearing
Yeah.
and listening, right? And so we identified this nonprofit that just does amazing work. So they literally take, as I mentioned, kids that are born completely deaf. They're not wired whatsoever. There's no hearing as part of their, when they're brought into the world. And if not for the work that this group would be doing, they would literally live in a silent world the rest of their life, with really only two options up until this technology became about, and that is sign language or lip reading.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets them along, they're able to communicate, but mostly they only communicate with people within their community. And I haven't done the actual numbers on it, but if you kind of extrapolate the math, in essence, if you picked all the international languages around the world, sign language is probably put a bunch of zeros, 0.1 in front of it, right? It's not even, I mean, when I'm in a crowd, sometimes 100 people ask, does anybody here speak sign language? Not a single hand goes up.
Yeah.
And so that kid literally would live um, the only person speaking that language for the most of, unless they are in that particular school. Um, and so, and again, I mentioned earlier, it's short of a miracle, but again, it's really not, because it's happening now. And we're not looking for a cure. We're not looking for it's not controversial. We're not looking for anything other than just bringing awareness to this what they're doing.
Yeah. That's incredible. I've got a reverb or some loud
Of
sound.
course,
Sorry.
right now the at this time of day, an unusual time to decide to do the leaf blowing outside. Yeah,
Nice. um,
as
the
as we say, this too shall pass. Yeah.
It shall. So that's incredible. As podcasters, yes, we're in the business of people being able to hear because we are sharing our voice, and the power of voice is kind of what International Podcast Day is all about. And the power of hearing is a huge thing. And if people can't hear and don't have access to something, like they only have sign language, like you're saying, that's very limiting because not everyone knows sign language. And the ability to help them have a way to hear is huge. So I'm very passionate about that. I also happen to be part of a community that's very is microphone focused and
Right. Right.
the technology side of it. So I'm actually kind of super interested in what kind of technology is in the cochlear implants that they have for the children. But so that's amazing that it's about raising awareness for this organization and the nonprofit, and that you found one to support and promote that way. And so,
I want to maybe mention the process that
yeah.
it takes, because it's not an easy process. So um, there's an enormous amount of kids that are born without the ability to hear or speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but again, it's not, we're not raising money for a cure, we're not raising money for research. It's just a matter of, again, awareness. And the basic process they go through, which we spent about 3 days at the facility to produce a 2-minute video that really encapsulates what they do. And it's rather simple, but at the same time it's not, right? So the process is basically they take that kid that literally the day they're born, they go through the medical observations to determine if there's any needs, and if hearing or either deaf or lack of uh, hearing abilities, then they basically it's a two-step process. So the first is they implant what's called cochlear implants, which helps the audio, but that doesn't address the point of speech
Mm-hmm.
and the therapy. And so
Yeah.
they have to literally sit in a space with the parent, the kid, and the therapist for a weekly session for every week, 52 weeks, for up to like 2 to 3 years. And they have to capture, there's a window here that they need to capture, which is about the first year and a half, or 2 years. Once they pass a certain age, it's kind of fused. And if you can imagine, never hearing it's very difficult and almost impossible at a certain age to go back and reconfigure this. And so, but also the beauty of what they've been doing up until recently has all been in their facility. So kids and families have been traveling, weekly from other parts of the country to go through this process. And then there's obviously education back with the parents once they're at home.
Hmm.
But beyond that, now with modern technologies like you and I are doing here through teletherapy, they can continue this process anywhere around the country, anywhere around the world, and that's where the beauty of podcasting ties in because there's podcasters not just in your town,
Hmm.
in New Zealand or here in Atlanta, Georgia, but all over the world. And so that's you know again bringing back to like the Tom Shoes or Home Depot. There's amazing nonprofits out there. There's people that are helping the ocean, that are saving pets, and so forth. And again, but talking about an alignment. If we can help those kids that would hear can hear this podcast, can hear your podcast and your listeners their podcast, but then extrapolate from there. Now collectively as a community, if we rally behind this, and I'll give some call to actions and opportunities of how people get involved, but they just rally behind this. Imagine that kid that I still get kind of emotional, but that kid that would now can listen to not only our podcast, but can be a future podcaster, the next
Yeah.
generation of podcasters. And we know the power of that, right? And so they could literally have the message that would have been unheard,
Hmm.
unspoken, that now can be communicated, could literally change their world, if not our world,
Yeah.
right?
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. We've got a lot of love in the chat for what you've been saying so far, so that's that's amazing. If anyone in the
Awesome.
chat does have any questions for Rich, do put them in there and let us know, and we'll answer them as we go along. I know that podcasting is a really amazing community. We do tend to rally around things and support things. Nick from Epic Film Guys is in the chat, and he hosts an event called Livestream for the Cure, which is a fundraising event for the Cancer Research Institute, and that's happening in May. And a lot of podcasters get involved and do that. And so that's why I was super passionate to have you here today as a podcaster and for this mission to help raise more awareness to get podcasters behind it as well, because I think like we have this amazing opportunity and to be able to open that up and the potential for these kids to be able to have that opportunity to podcast in the future. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about and grateful that I have the ability to do. And I just hope that that's and something that more people have the ability to do in the future going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we all have a unique voice and unique platform,
Yeah.
and it's a shame that that would go, the world could miss out on that, right? And
Yeah.
what's unique as opposed to mainstream media, as we all know, is we're able to filter, not be filtered
Mm.
and communicate our message, whatever that message is. And I'll mention a couple of things. I'm sure we'll do some more call to actions, but as they're listening, definitely, you can visit podcastworldtour.org.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's just podcastworldtour.org. We'll probably talk about some of the trips we've already made, some trips coming up and so forth. But there's multiple ways you can get involved. So anywhere from a simple, donation to a becoming, if you're in the business as a brand or as a company or as a service provider to the industry, we're looking to we've already bring on more what we call not just sponsors. We want them as tour partners. We
Cool.
want them to join in this mission, right? And be part of the tour, be part of the partner. So I'll just on the site, if you click under ways to get involved or mission, you'll see those call to actions. And it can be as simple as a podcaster, the power of your platform. If you literally just send out a tweet, an Instagram, a message, a Facebook post, what we call a PSA, a public service announcement on your podcast,
Yeah.
sure, we need money to fund the tour, but I can't express how grateful we are for you guys, Heather, Sunshine, and Power Cuts, and what you're doing the live stream here. This is this message will be carried not just live, but as you mentioned on your platform, and the people that can share this, it's just an enormous benefit. So again, social media, shout out on your website, any of your platforms be huge. You could, as podcasters, you can make just even a simple $5 donation. And we did that at, I'll mention a recent event we were at, did that. And we had people donate way beyond that. And again, that to be very clear, that all that money goes to us ability to further the tour, to add more tour stops on the tour.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you can donate directly to the nonprofit, which is Auditory Verbal Center, ABC hears.org. But they have most of their funding is covered from insurance and so forth. So any nonprofit certainly would welcome more funding,
Mm-hmm.
and that's our goal down the road. But we have to kind of get the ball rolling, right? We have to get on the road to get this message across. So it's really an awareness campaign at this point. We have talked about some nonprofit event, fundraising, but again, back to the Tom shoes. If you're familiar with that, they donate a pair of shoes for every pair that's bought and sold. If no one's buying the shoes, if they can't stay in business, they can't give those shoes away,
Yeah.
right? So if we can't fund the tour, we can't help get the message out, and that's our awareness campaign. So finally, making donations. We have a crowdfunding platform on Indiegogo, our merch store. People love. I see that your coffee cups behind you there. The branding, I love that. So people can get some of the merch, which is kind of cool, and you get something and you give something as well, right? And then finally, again, to our any brands that are in the podcasting industry, the business or providing services, platforms, any of those networks and so forth, or these apps. There's so many new upstarts that are coming onto the into the podcasting world, and again, you can kind of support the tour. Our Keith, our director of corporate partnerships, would be happy to have a conversation, and we have a media kit, all that good stuff that'll show all the value we're going to add. We hope to over deliver to those partners between not just links on the site, their branding at our events, on our merch, all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
that's a number of ways you can help support the tour
That's
and get
awesome.
involved.
Brad Hargis from the Cinema Guys is in the chat. He's another podcaster, and he said podcasts can bring so many people together in great positive ways, and it's 100% true. So yeah, there are lots of ways: tweeting, sharing PSAs. Lots of
Right.
podcasts put little bumper clips, or I've now lost the term that they use for it, like promos in their shows,
Right. Yeah.
and little things like that. And we have people who listen, so that spreads the message further than we can think. Like throwing a stone into a pond, and the ripple effect of that is
Absolutely.
huge. And so on Sunshine and Power Cuts, people can find links to podcastworldtour.org, and I have links on these videos, replays as well, and at sunshinesummit.live. So all of those things are there, and I would love more people to check it out. On the note of the goals behind what you're doing, you've got three main things that you're focusing on.
Yeah.
You're inform, inspire, and impact. And I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on those three goals.
Absolutely. We were able to crystallize a lot of moving parts in building out not just the website, but the mission, all the moving parts. One of the takeaways I observed from that was it's very complicated to make something simple.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when we can narrow it down to those, what we call the three I's, so inform, inspire, and impact. And so, but before I mention that, I did want to again thank you, that the artwork that you designed, whoever designed that to promote this with our brand and the way you encapsulate the message was just beautiful. So a shout out to you or your team, whoever did that, but very talented.
Just me. You're welcome.
All right, cool, awesome. So the three I's are first is inform. So when we land in a town, so our first mission is to be informed about what they're doing, inform them about the tour, if you will, as well, right? So we want to learn about. We've already been to London. I'm going to actually open this up here to give more light to the situation here. Just closed it for the leaf blowers. I think they've gone now. When we're in a town, and I'll mention some of the places we've been so far in a minute here, but so we hope to be informed about what they're doing in that community, what inspires that community, and that's the second eye. So we look to find out, what inspires you. What's your inspiring message? Who inspires you? Who's your mentors and so forth? What nonprofits are you involved in? What community givebacks are you engaged with, right? And then the final segue is we hope to inspire you with our message to help us make an impact.
Yeah.
Right. And as we mentioned, that impact is with those kids.
Yeah, I love that it's a mutual thing, that you are exploring what's there, what they're inspired by, and then again sharing what you're working towards as well. Because I think that we can all, we all have things that we're working towards, but when we mutually support each other, we can sort of like I like to say, shine bright together and light up the whole world. Like the more
Nice.
support we have, the better. um, yeah. So informing and inspiring, and your impact then is to bring the awareness to what you're doing, or
Yeah, specifically podcasters, but when
yeah.
we were in Greenville, South Carolina, for example, and so one thing we look to identify, and this is a shout out, another call to action, how you can get involved. And in this case, we're not looking for money. You don't have to purchase merch and all that good stuff. But we're actually looking to identify in each of the cities what we call a city ambassador,
Yeah.
right? And so that person is helps rally, the local community behind what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of the boots on the street, so to speak, and is hopefully ideally connected to that community, has some establishments, whether they're been a member of the Chamber of Commerce or leader in the community, influencer, in and outside of their podcast platform. They don't necessarily even need to be a podcaster per se. For example, Joe was our shout out to Joe, was our city ambassador in Greenville, South Carolina. He's been there a number of years. He's really dialed into the print media for a number of years, and so has a lot of connections. And so that city ambassador would help us identify guests that would make sense. So they help us with our guest acquisition and booking. They might help us with our facility. So typically we set up a pop-up studio in a co-working space.
Cool.
And so they're either from maybe their office is available or they know of a space. If not, I mean, it's a partnership. So we do some of the legwork obviously as well. And then they help us orchestrate, or in the second day of the event, we do podcasting in our studio, in our pop-up studio, throughout the 3 or 4 days that we're there. But in the second and third days each day, we also look for that city ambassador to help us identify events. And again, they don't necessarily need to be podcasting events, just any business association, chamber of commerce, faith-based organization, nonprofit, anywhere there is an audience. We'd love to be there and just network and pass out our business cards and just one-on-one tell our story. We don't need a platform with a microphone to take over that event. We just want to participate in that event. And then typically we find people that attend those events that are doing inspiring work that we want to bring it back the next day or that evening into our podcast studio. Or obviously we have remote gear. We can just do what we call a roving reporter. So if the stars align and the permission is there and it makes sense and we're moved to do so, and we feel like it makes sense, then we'll do an interview right there on the spot. Again, we want to capture these stories along the tour, and some of them don't so always have to tie into our big mission, because there's more goals we have involved besides the one awareness campaign. So while we're on the road, as a podcaster, we want to kind of just play in that sandbox a little bit, outside of the nonprofit, and just find some compelling stories, maybe some quirky, offbeat, stories. And the podcast, actually, one of the podcast brands that we use for that is actually called the World's Best Podcast.com. Drop the microphone, right? So we find those interesting, inspiring stories that may or may not tie into our mission, but just is something that is not being told, and we hope to share. So so that's what Joe did for us. And then finally, the other couple of days, as we're collecting those stories, a city ambassador would help us orchestrate. Ultimately, it culminates to typically a Thursday evening event that we collectively orchestrate, as a team effort, from social media ramp ups, from all the people we met at the morning breakfast meetings, the lunch meetings, and after hours networking events, from our city ambassador, from our team, and so forth. We orchestrate that final event, that typically that Thursday evening. And the last two events, we've had over 100 people at the event. So it's really cool. And so that's really our give back to that city ambassador, because it helps raise their profile in the city, right, from the work that they're doing. And then we, again, at the end, end game is to raise it. So those 100 people and more are now telling the story, whether they're podcasters or just, local business leaders or influencers that, are not aware of this. And we find typically, parents or kids or people that have a story about somebody they know that is, unfortunately, their only option is sign language. And had they known, this, I'll just share a quick story. I was at Starbucks a while back, and really it hits home a lot, and so I was at Starbucks, and there was this guy behind a barista that was probably 35, 40 years old, and they had a sign up, on the counter. But as you can imagine, there's lots of messages going on at any Starbucks at any given time, and there's customers shouting at this person, feeling they were being ignored because he has back toward felt that he was really rude. They didn't read the small sign that said, he can't hear or speak. And so I just, um, it just really, again, I mean, this could be prevented,
Yeah.
and that person could live in a hearing world and not just podcasting, can hear music. Look at the impact music makes on our lives, right? And the change that it makes, the message that that communicates, right? And be able to, have their mom say, I love you, or just, be able to talk to their, um, uh, to people that they love and care about, right? And so, this is, and again, as much as I can preach to the podcasting community, any way you can help us, social media, just get the word out. Podcastworldtour.org. Again, all of the videos are there, our tour dates, the call to actions, how you can get involved, and just I'm so appreciative of just this opportunity alone. And this is huge. And I again appreciate we connected through International Podcast Day, a number of direct message on Instagram. Then we had some email challenges. So, you're unbelievable how your perseverance and your making this happen for us is just. I'm a little speechless, and if you ever meet me, that's pretty rare.
So your mission and being a podcast world tour, you're inclusive of everyone around the world, and I'm excited for you that that's the plan is to travel around and just like podcasting is international. And I love that we're able to connect like this because I'm in New Zealand, you're in the States. Here we are
Right.
together at this time, and we're able to do that with technology, which is incredible. And there are all these events that you're going to and connections that you're making in local communities and people just that you're meeting and hearing their stories and sharing yours. And you're welcome. I'm thrilled. I'm very passionate about what you're doing. Would you be able to tell us some of the events that you've been to? Like you've been to She Podcasts Live, which is a podcast particular event, but there's other amazing event things that you've been to. I've lost your audio. Sorry. I can't hear you. Hang on a second. I'll just have to check. Are you able to check the microphone setting on your side? Hold fire, team. I'll just go to me on the screen. Rich, if you could check on your side, I can't hear you coming through. Can you still hear me? Improv. I'm not sure. I can't hear you. I've lost it. Would you be able to refresh and come back? Would that be okay? I will just go to. Can you still hear me, Mark? Am I still coming through? I will read the chat. Sorry, I'm going to catch up with your messages in a second. Thank you very much for being in the chat. I really appreciate everyone who is here. My audio is fine, thank you. I'll just let back in Rich and hopefully we'll have audio again. Nope, I still don't have you. I'll just reset some settings on my side. Hang on a second. Sorry, everybody. Can you hear me? While you're waiting, today I have Rich from Podcast World Tour, and I'm just going to try and see if I can get the audio to come back. I'm not sure where it's gone to. you can hear me, but I still can't hear Rich. Unfortunately, we've lost a connection audibly, which is unideal. He's just going to pop back, hopefully. Hello? I am not sure what's gone wrong with the tech. What gear questions did you have, Mark? Just so I can take them for when Rich comes back. So, yeah, like we were saying, I met Rich back at International Podcast Day last year and was really passionate about it. On YouTube, they've got their video that they did, a 2-minute about their brief on what they're doing. And I would love for everybody to check that out if you're able to. I will have a link to that in the replay of this video. Hey, Tim. Quite partial to drinks. What do you guys think about Podcast World Tour so far? So basically, they're raising awareness about the mission to help deaf kids hear and speak, but also about connecting with podcasters and hearing their message, which I think is important, like learning from others and sharing that, and then also sharing their own message. Yeah. They've had quite a few interviews so far on the podcast as well. They've had a London interview with Bentley Lewis, which is a global executive search firm, and they've had quite a few guests on their US podcast. They've been at several different events in the US, like She Podcast, which I was just asking Rich about, and they've talked to Andrew Zimmern in Atlanta, Taste of the NFL, the School of Greatness. They've talked to Lewis Howes. They've talked to Bill Masters, the inventor of 3D printing. Chris Curran, Podcast Engineering School, who has been a Sunshine Summit guest before and is an incredible supporter of all that I do and hosts the Podcasters Lounge. They've talked to Aaron P. Woods and Keith Marshall of PodPal in Orlando. They've talked to Fight to End Type 1 Diabetes, featuring Greater Western Carolina's JDRF chapter in Charlotte. They had a mobile studio where they talked to Rhonda Evans and Lisa Heffler, Podblast in Charlotte. They talked to Deb Cake Fortin and John Gregory Vincent from Submarine Way. Joe Tope, journalist, adjunct instructor, and media relations professional. 13 Stripes Brewery, Kenworth Reeves, Greenville, South Carolina. Acclaim Aerospace, I think they spoke to Jason Primo, the CEO. And 29th Taste of Alfreda, I think I pronounced that correctly, hopefully. So they've had lots of amazing conversations already. That's a podcast that's available to listen to, those conversations of stories that they've had with people, and I would love for you to check that out. The link to podcastworldtour.org is available on my website, so you can find that there. Not So Busy said, I love the connections that have been made through this collaboration. I think it's awesome. Thank you so much, Not So Busy. It's quite a collection of great people. Impressive. Yeah, what they're doing is really cool. And like I said, I haven't known of them for very long. International Podcast Day is September the 30th. It's a celebration of the power of voice, the power of podcasting. It's hosted by Steve and Dave Lee. And yeah, awesome that they were able to. They are very passionate about podcasting and podcasting related and anything that is helping bring people together and sharing a great message, just like what Rich Casanova, that's my guest for today, is doing with Podcast World Tour. And so super grateful that they did that. And then they gave them a gratitude award because what they're doing is really helpful and beneficial to, support other podcasters, but also the not-for-profit that they're partnered with. And I hope that they're able to make more connections in the future. I believe they do have some connections with podcast partners, like podcast-related businesses and things that are behind what they're doing. And they're in the stages of growth. So like anything, it takes time and takes raising awareness for what you're doing. And that's what I wanted to do for today, was to shine a light on them and let people know about them, because yeah, that's what raising awareness is all about. I am not sure if we're going to be able to get Rich back. I'll just you can nominate your city for the Podcast World Tour as well on their website, so pop in the details and they will get there. They had hoped to come to New Zealand, which is really exciting, and I'm on board with that and would love to meet up with them if they do make it here and be a city ambassador, as Rich was saying. So there's that. He was saying about you can support them, ways to help. You can make a donation, order merch. My merch from Podcast World Tour didn't turn up in time, so I have my mugs there, but something like that is what Nick Haskins from Epic Film Guys does for Livestream for the Cure, which is another huge event that a lot of podcasters, as I mentioned, get behind and support. And they raise incredible amounts of money for the Cancer Research Institute to find a cure for cancer. And that's something that I'm also incredibly passionate about. And you can find all those details on my website. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that in May. You can find all those details at livestreamforthecure.com. But merch, and I'm a collector of mugs. I love mugs, and it is a nice way of having your brand there, but mugs are fun to have drinks in. Here we go, hopefully. Hello. Oh, hello, welcome back. We've got you and I can hear you.
I hope everybody enjoyed that break or whatever. Yeah, it gave me a chance to go grab some coffee from our official Podcast World Tour mug. Yeah,
Awesome.
there it is. And I have the award I'll show in a minute. I went downstairs and grabbed the award as well. We were talking about earlier from International Podcast Day. But so what did I miss out on during the break?
Well, while you were away, I just went through some of the guests that you've had on the Podcast World Tour podcast, the US one, and mentioned about you traveling and connecting with those kinds of people. And Tim Gabor said that's quite a collection of great people. Impressive.
Yeah, a few of them. We've actually been involved in the TASA NFL.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing nonprofit that give back to local community food banks, about 8 million meals. And so they've invited us to we had the founder in our studio, and then they invited us to Miami for the Super Bowl. So it's pretty amazing. But then again, while we're there, we get to attend these events and share the message of our tour. And Lewis Howes, if people know about him as a podcaster, 1.6 million followers. He was on Ellen DeGeneres and so forth. And so we had a chance to interview him. You're also mentioning about events. So ideally, when we land in these cities, initially we were just traveling. We're picking out cities, starting obviously in the U.S., but we've had some international trips as well. I'll mention those in a minute here. But in our U.S. cities, we kind of identified the 4 regions of the U.S. and based on the season. We broke it into 4 seasons and 4 regions. But then we got to thinking, we don't have to, lock ourselves into those dates and times and locations. So we really ideally we now want to sync them with podcasting events that are happening, right? Ideally, but still reach all the, we have a goal of 25 cities in the US, and we'll mention some of the international locations as well. But you mentioned some of the events. So we were at, I think our first official, well, we were at Podcast Movement last year in August, and it was in Orlando. And we just, as an attendees, we were just sharing our message, right? And just anybody that could, we could bend their ear for a minute. But actually had a great opportunity through, what's that platform now? I'm trying to think of it off the top of my head. But not Shoebox, but Shoe something. I'll think of a minute here, but they gave us a moderator position on one of their panels and got to interview some people from Himalaya and some other big brands and kind of share our story. So that was amazing. Um, and then Showbox, I think no, that's not it either. Just one of those quirky names, but we'll put it in the show notes or the information.
Yeah.
But so that was at Podcast Movement in Orlando, and again, there's about 3,000 people there, and again, it's sharing our message. We didn't talk to all 3,000, but back to what we were talking about earlier, we asked, one of the questions we on our short list, we asked people when we start sharing our messages, do you speak sign language? And we didn't run into a single person that speaks that language, right? So it's imagine going to a country, living there for your entire life, and not speaking the language of that country and never being able to learn it, right? So again, it goes back to, if you tuned in earlier, that's our mission with the tour is our give back, aligning what we call adopting this nonprofit auditorial verbal center that basically takes kids that are born deaf, and rather than living in a silent world the rest of their life, can actually, through cochlear implants, about 2 years of high-level speech therapist, and the speech therapy that the therapists that are able to do this. There's only about 500 of these people in the world at that level. So it's not just go in and sit in a classroom and talk about the ABCs and what have you, right? So that was our first really large event, and we've hosted a number of events here in our hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, through podcasting meetup groups, which is another great opportunity in those cities. If there's a meetup group for podcasters, we'd love to communicate with them. But you mentioned She Podcast Live, which was an amazing event, and if you haven't heard about it, Chris from PodFest helped orchestrate that, along with Jess or Jessica and Elsie. She's with Libsyn, I believe, and she was on that live stream with the International Podcast Day when they rolled out our video and so forth. You mentioned at the top of the show, but the She Podcast Live was an amazing event, first ever dedicated podcasting event, primarily for women, to gather the podcasting women's community together. And typically the first event, you'd have 50 or 60 or 75 people. I think that was about the numbers with PodFest their first year. Again, with that, Chris was instrumental in helping kind of team up with Jess and Elsie to help orchestrate that, from the sponsors and the venue and all the moving parts. They had their first year, over 500 women attend this event. It was just, spectacular. It was just amazing. And Jess basically heard our story, as you heard our story. And again, almost the 11th hour, said, Rich and Nick and Michael and the team, we'd love to have you guys tell your message. And they went above and beyond and actually supplied us with a booth, our first, trade show or networking event booth, to put up our banners. And we actually invited the founders, or not the founders, of the CEO of the nonprofit. The mother that, had two of her kids that were actually born deaf, 30 some odd years ago, and enrolled them in the program. And now Jonathan, for example, 35-year-old adult, is at our booth, just like you and I talking right now. And if you didn't see behind his ear the implant, you'd have no clue, right? And it's just full circle what that family has done. So they were at their booth. We showed our video, told our story, just had an amazing reception. And then finally, that I don't know if you want to break to another topic. I mentioned a couple other events as well.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible that you had those connections available. She Podcast actually had it available for virtual attendees too, so I was able to be a
Right,
virtual attendee.
right.
And so it's amazing how accessible some of these things are, and it's very cool that they opened that up for you and you had that space to be there, and that you've been able to go to these things because that's where people are, and to hear and share those stories. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of hearing, so again, kind of come full circle. So I've known Chris with Podfest for a number of years, just attending his first event. I got invited to speak and just kind of stayed in touch. And uh, but it was last August, I was at an event that he was attending as well, and he had a booth set up for promoting Sheep Podcast, what have you, in Florida. And I said, and we had just gotten the video like that day because our production team was working to meet a deadline. And so they just released it. So Nick, the co-host of the show, shout out to Nick Rodriguez, he goes on tour with us as well. And so we had it just arrived in an inbox, and I happened to run into Chris. I said, Chris, I have a video I'd like to show you. So he pulled me aside. He watched the 2-minute video, and he shared with me. He says, Rich, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm actually deaf in one of my ears. I had no clue. I had no
Wow.
idea. And so, yeah, that was my response as well. And so he says, Rich, we want to get involved and help you do that. So that kind of springboarded the She Podcast Live. And then we just came back about a couple weeks ago from the Podfest in Orlando. And again, we had a booth there, amazing response, got to tell our story. So, I mean, you really feel like this is something, when I say rallying the podcasting community behind this, if there's not a better cause, to help kids hear your podcast as a podcaster, and we mentioned earlier, become the next generation of podcasters. I mean, I think it's just hand in glove. And that's our mission, to help get the word out.
Yeah. Would you be able to share with us the award that you managed to bring up in the break?
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll mention that. And again, while I'm unboxing it, so here it is. So again, to Steve. So we told the story earlier, but a few days before the event, I reached out to him. He said we'd love to help. He not only showed the video, he spoke about the mission and so forth, and then he announced that I think Dave actually announced that they were going to honor us with the third ever International Podcast Day Gratitude Award, and so but then we were going to She Podcast Live, and I was kind of like, you know, uh, going above and beyond. I said, "Is there any way you could, send it to us so we'd actually have it in sight?" So he literally overnight. It was rather a little pricey, but here's the actual award.
That's amazing.
So it's their gratitude award, and again, it's the third only that they've awarded, and we take this to all of our events. We had this at She Podcast Live. We took it to Podfest. It's at all of our booths. So again, much appreciation again to International Podcast Day and Steve and Dave over there.
Yeah, cool. Mark D said nice, and I think that's incredible that they did that. They are. I was in the break saying that Dave and Steve Lee are incredibly supportive and passionate about all things, and yeah, I'm thrilled that they were able to highlight you and your mission on International Podcast Day last year. And so coming up
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
future,
if not for that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would
exactly,
have met, right?
exactly.
And speaking of meeting, I don't know if this is good, but I love what you're doing. You're doing a tour as well. It's what I heard. What I heard,
Yes,
right? So I'm
hopefully.
not letting the cat out of the bag or a scoop here or whatever, but
Hopefully, when that happens will be determined. I'm not sure whether I'll have to
right,
reschedule it at this stage, but
sure.
yeah, it is my goal and my passion. I've had for a very long time. I am in New Zealand. I made a lot of connections here, and I'd love to make more locally. But also, I've made amazing international connections through podcasting. I love that it's opened up the world to me, and some of those amazing connections are in the US, and that's a place that I definitely love to visit to. And I have a trip planned out to visit all around there. So I definitely would love to come and see you when I do make it
Have you
there.
been to this? Have you been to the States before?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I've never been to New Zealand.
Yeah.
So we chatted about that, I think, on a DM on Instagram.
Yeah.
But when the stars align,
Mm-hmm.
would love to host you here in Atlanta. I think that was one of the stops you had pinpointed on your tour. So
Yeah.
we'd love to orchestrate an event while you're in town and continue the conversation and the community that we're starting to build. And New Zealand is definitely on the map. I've never been there. I've heard amazing things about it. So we've, in terms of international, most of our folks right now is in the States because we're based here. But
Mhm.
we have actually a shout out to Jason Smith. He's our quote. Technically, he's our what we call international global correspondent. So he travels naturally for business. So he heard our story. He wasn't even a podcaster at the time. Now he's a podcaster, right? But because we gave him a kit to take with him, right? So when he travels, he again heard our story, really resonated with him. And speaking of resonating, I know I'm a little bit scattered here, but as a thought comes to mind, I might want to share with you. So, although I don't have a personal story, but two of our hosts, because we have like a network and a network of podcast studios here in Georgia, and two of our hosts actually later in life became virtually deaf or very hard of hearing, and so they're a podcaster, but they were able to speak and talk, up until 40 years old, and so it's a different type of application of what we're talking about with kids, right? But again, it really resonates with me. Them being able to have a podcast, have a platform, even though they're relatively very hard of hearing. But back to our tour, so Jason Smith, our international correspondent, so he travels naturally. So he heard our story. We gave him a microphone, and a mobile kit to take on the road. He's actually been so far to Bangkok. He's been to Paris, France, in London. And for example, and each of those, again, he follows that framework of the three I's we mentioned earlier, which is inform, inspire, or impact, and inspire and impact. Yeah. So it's very surreal because obviously I haven't been to those countries where he was at, and so he literally sat in a conference room, for example, in a global company based out of London. They have offices in New York and other places, and they do employment and staffing. So they're not podcasters. So that's not our exclusive audience, right? Whoever can, hear a message and communicate it. So I'm here in the States listening to this recording that Jason did to a country I've never been to, people I've never met, right? And yet he captured their story, learned about what they do in terms of staffing and their business, and so forth, shared our story. And you can hear in the conversation, one of the women in the room kind of gets very emotional about the impact we're making, and they're now sharing that story that would have otherwise been unheard. So, but we can't wait to get to Australia, New Zealand, and pick a date, put a date on the calendar, and make that happen with y'all.
Yeah, that's incredible. I can't believe that we did have a question in the chat about the tech or the gear that you have for like the mobile
Okay.
podcast setup that you've got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rather simple. So we get like just one of these little mini recorders, are about like that size. Olympus, I think, is one of the brands. Um, and you can use it literally as a handheld. If you ever watch like some sports reporting, like in the locker room, they'll have that little recorder. It's just a handheld device that they're recording for the athletes. And so they don't bring in a lot of recording gear. It's not the best quality, sound that you can possibly get, but it captures the moment, right? And we call it kind of theater of the mind. So you can picture yourself there, on site. But we actually then rig it with a XLR microphone, and we have the branding on the mic with the mic flag. We plug that then into there's kind of a unique cord that you have to kind of search around and find, but there's a cord that'll take it from XLR actually to mini plug. That mini plug goes right into that little recording device, and so although you can record without the microphone, again, it's kind of optics. So when you're, doing what we call a roving reporter, so if we're at an event, instead of just having what looks like a cell phone, a little mini recording device, you actually are branded with your microphone in hand and your microphone flag and all that good stuff. And you can plug in headsets. So we've used that at some pretty, large events where you can literally it fits in a really about like the size of this box, that the award came in. It's a very compact. It fits in his luggage, and when he travels international, every space is pretty limited. So I'm trying to picture what it not much bigger than like a laptop case or whatever, right? Not even a laptop bag, but just whatever your laptop would fit in. We can get that in there, and then he, obviously through technologies, uploads it to the cloud. We download it here in Atlanta, put it up on our site. Yeah, and it's just yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's actually a really cool device. I think it was shout out to Yellow Tag because you're going to sponsor the tour, right? Yellow Tag, we just did a shout out to you. Damn, I don't know if you've seen their microphone, but it's literally just a handheld microphone, wireless, that you can put a chip recorder in there, and it records on the microphone itself. There's no other devices connected to it. That's a pretty neat. So Yellow Tag, we're looking for you to support the tour. Come on board as a tour partner. We don't do shout outs for free.
That's awesome. There is some very cool technology that's available to help do mobile setup things. It's awesome that you've got something, and I love that it's got the branding and the mic that's it's able to be handheld. And
yeah, kind of like that right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get your merch. Go to podcastworldtour.org. Order your merch today.
On that note, here I just have a change scene for the live stream, and I have links to all of your things. So on Twitter, it's Podcast World TOU, because podcast cuts things short. Sure. Yeah. But on Instagram, it's Podcast World Tours. Facebook, you have a page, Podcast World Tour. And the website is podcastworldtour.org. And like I said, all of that is linked on my both the sunshinesummit.live and my own podcast website there. But I want to say thank you so much, Rich, for being here today, for sharing your message, for what you're doing. And I'm glad that we were able to connect today, even through the difficulties of that, but also in the pre-thing. And it's incredible what you're doing. This whole mission that you have is huge and will have a huge impact on the world. And I'm fully behind that in any way that I can help. I'll definitely do that. And I would love for more people in podcasting and that I know of. I'm going to help share the message as much as I can. And yeah, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came by the live chat. We had Tim, Mark, and Nick, and a few other people. It was amazing to see them there. And yeah, thank you again for being part of the Sunshine Summit.
Heather, a million thanks to you. I mean, just your, again, perseverance in making this happen. And despite communication challenges and internet connections, I mean, and we really look forward to hosting you here in the States, as well as being there in New Zealand. And again, just can't say how much we appreciate you sharing this message on your platform. And it's really cool what you're doing. When I first heard about the summit, I thought, this is kind of cool. I need to tune in and hear I'm a guest or whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you're a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks again.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Keep the sunshine going.
Will do. Thank you, everyone.